All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the SEMA Collision Repair and Refinish stage. I am Bud Center, the Director of Technical Products and Curriculum with ICAR, and next to me we have...
TJ O'Rourke, one of the subject matter experts at ICAR as well.
Jason Hubble, another subject matter expert. Glad to be here.
And Joel Dufkus, I am one of the ADAS and EV instructors at ICAR.
All right, so guys, here today we're going to talk a little bit about ADAS. ADAS. Everybody knows what that is, right?
Advanced Driver Assistance Systems.
There you go. So, it's something that we hear an awful lot about in the collision industry. We hear about ADAS and the importance of understanding the systems and how they operate and the calibrations that are required. Yet we seem to see an awful lot of people out there that are doing them wrong or not doing them at all. I have conversations with shops all the time that you ask them, how are you doing your calibrations and when? And they'll say things like, well, there was no trouble light, so we sent it down the road.
Or they said they didn't unplug the camera or something, so I don't need to do it.
Right. So I think it all starts with, I think, they need to understand, they need to do the research, right? They need to get out there and understand the vehicle you're working on, the repairs you're performing, and the calibrations that need to be done, right? So if we start, let's just talk a little bit about some of the training that we offer to support the ADAS needs in the industry. We have, how many online courses do we have now for ADAS?
I think we're up to 11.
We have 11 prerequisites for sure in the ADAS, and we have an ADAS role now that is an optional role. And then we'll move over to Joel, one of our instructors that's actually leading some of our ADAS hands-on training. So we've got two of those courses, right? One we built in collaboration with Ford, that is a Ford-specific course, and then we've got another one that focuses on static calibration. Maybe tell us a little bit about those two.
Yeah, so the Ford class Ford does a dynamic calibration, which means you have to drive the vehicle and it calibrates itself while you drive it. So our Ford class is based on a diagnosis of what happens when the calibration doesn't calibrate, when it doesn't go through. So we have 4 Ford vehicles that have been bugged by some of our subject matter experts and Mr. Jeff Poole himself. And we can introduce different bugs in there and really challenge the diagnostic side of those technicians to figure out what happens. There's a lot of crazy bugs that you don't think are going to affect an ADAS system, but they affect an ADAS system. And it's really interesting what can affect those things.
Yeah. So if we think about some of the things that shops need to consider if they're going to do ADAS repairs, I mean, TJ, Jason, either one of you guys, if you want to just kind of expand a little bit on some of the considerations that shops need to think about if they're going to step into ADAS calibrations.
Well, first, you really got to do your research because it could be as simple as R&I in a bumper cover that requires calibration of either a front radar or a front camera. So research is really key. Another thing is that when I think of like blind spot sensors, getting the vehicle structure back to as built specs is super important because a lot of blind spot sensors don't have adjustments in them and they're just a dynamic calibration. But if where it mounts is way off, it's going to screw everything up.
Yeah,
And
I know we've done some research, right? We'll talk a little bit about the tech center and some of the things that we have at the new CTC in a minute, but I know some of the research that we've done, the early research anyways, we've gone in with some of these vehicles and intentionally moved sensors and things just to see what would happen. So kind of to simulate having a bent bracket or having a structure that wasn't put back to where it should be. And then we go out and drive the vehicles, look at the live data, and we found that some of these systems, you'll drive the vehicle and the system will appear to be working, and then it'll get to where it's so far out of whack with the adjustment that it just drops offline. So we need to, the understanding that you need to have the vehicle structure right, you need to have the brackets correct, you need to have the sensors in the right spot. All of those things are critical to making sure that these systems function. Yeah.
And even the refinishing side of the stuff too. So going on what Jason was saying with the blind spot sensors, if the bumper cover, depending on the manufacturer's service information, they're going to give you an area where you can't do any kind of repairs in. And discussions with some paint manufacturers. The paint needs to be applied in a certain way. Certain colors are going to affect how they work and stuff like that too. So there's a lot of consideration to go into this stuff.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about our Chicago Tech Center and what we're doing there. We, along with our hands-on training that we have there, we started to talk a little bit about the static calibration course. And in the actual ADAS lab itself, we've done some things to make sure that we have the ideal conditions for learning for all of the students to come through, but that we have the ideal conditions for performing these calibrations. We've got a section of the shop floor that has been poured to be level and flat, confirmed with 3D lasers and things as we were doing it to make sure that it's level and flat. We've got some manufacturers out there that say you need to do this on a level flat surface, but don't really tell you anything other than level and flat, and others will tell you, that it can be 1 degree of slope over 27 feet or something like that. So it's pretty important. What are some of the other things that we've done in that ADAS lab?
So the floor, making sure you don't have a shiny finish on the floor, which can cause hot spots and cause maybe some calibration issues with the forward-facing cameras. The walls, making sure there's not stuff all over the walls, making sure you have a kind of blank canvas. So when that camera's looking at that target, it's looking at that target. It's not looking at all the stuff on the walls. We also have LED lighting that's dimmable, so we can create the right kind of lighting situations needed for those calibrations.
Great. So let's talk about maybe some of the misconceptions about these calibrations. I can tell you that I have had many conversations with shops, and I'll ask, how are they performing their calibrations today? And they say, well, they have a third-party company that comes in and does it. And when we start looking at the shop, I'm looking for the space in the shop where they could do the calibrations and do them properly. And they tell me things like, well, they do it in the parking lot. And I don't know about any of you guys. Have any of you guys seen a vehicle yet that can be calibrated properly in a parking lot?
No.
I mean, when you think about the fact that reflections and shadows are a problem, sun, the levelness of the parking lot, you put the target over and it's, the target's leaning one way or the other. I mean, we need to make sure that shops understand that you need to make sure that your third-party provider is doing it right as well. They need to make sure that they're getting the right kind of documentation from them to show that the targets were placed in the right spot, that they followed the procedure, all of those things to make sure that they're covering themselves.
And make sure you're completing your pre and post scan as well.
Yeah.
And just to keep documentation of that on record for
Yep.
any future problems that might happen to the car.
Yeah. Yep. So I'll give you an example. We went out to, when we were early on in our ADAS journey, we went out and visited some folks that are doing these calibrations, and they wanted to show us an example of some things. So one of the things that we talk about all the time is making sure, ICAR, we always say, always follow vehicle maker repair procedures. No exceptions. Always follow the vehicle maker repair procedures. And in some cases, that includes specific tools and targets and things like that. So we went out to a third-party provider that had started doing some of their own research on this stuff, and they did a calibration on a brand new vehicle. We watched them do it, and they used OEM equipment and then went out and tested the collision mitigation braking in a parking lot with one of those big foam targets. And drove at it about 30 miles an hour. No driver. We had a cameraman in the back catching it all. No driver intervention at all, and the vehicle stopped before it got to the target. Took that same vehicle back inside the building and used an aftermarket system. And I'm not saying that there's a problem with any one or any other aftermarket systems, just I guess trying to stress the importance of making sure that all the targets and everything are right. They calibrated the exact same vehicle on the same floor with an aftermarket system, went out and tried to test this again, and it punted the target 300 yards across the parking lot, didn't even slow down. So, and that was the same vehicle, same floor, same conditions, aftermarket targets, and the target, when we started doing some research, the targets were just a little bit off in size. That's all it takes.
And there's that, and there's also some that are maybe resizing targets and changing values from the OE that can affect those calibrations as well.
Yeah. So when you guys are putting together curriculum now at the Appleton Tech Center and some of the things we're doing, we have obviously our ADAS courses that we're doing, but we now have to start thinking about the fact that courses that we're developing for structural and non-structural techs and refinishers need to have that ADAS spin. We need to make sure that the way that ADAS relates to all these other things that go on with the vehicles and repairs are covered in that course curriculum. What are just some of the things that you guys might have seen in some of the courses you're working on now?
Well, one of the things is, like Joel mentioned earlier about refinishing, over blind spot sensor areas. That was in a vehicle-specific course, and then that should also be in, any refinishing courses. That needs to be stressed because obviously, there's a lot of manufacturers, vehicle makers that say you either can't do an area or just can't do repair a bumper at all.
Right. I was actually having a conversation with one of the major paint manufacturers last night, and we were talking about how it's, depending on the vehicle makers, some of them, it's as specific as needing to know what color the car is, because if it's a particular color or metallic, has a lot of metallic flake in it, they don't want you to refinish that bumper cover again. If there's any damage, it's put a new cover on, paint it once, because mill thickness becomes a big issue.
And that even comes to play with the ultrasonic sensors as well. They sell them pre-finished from the manufacturer already, and they don't want you painting over them because any extra mill you put on there is going to affect how those sensors read out.
Yeah. So let's go back and talk again. Let's go. I guess I'm just really proud of our ADAS training, which, by the way, we won an award for while we're here at SEMA. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So we, we'll start with the dynamic calibration course. We have the Ford vehicles that we have in there, and we developed that in collaboration with Ford. And you talked a little bit about the way that we set them up, and we have some of the bugs and things in there. But that course really, because Ford is primarily dynamic calibrations, meaning you drive the vehicle to calibrate, with the exception of some vehicles with the 360 system, 360 cameras. That course is really focused on what do you do when the calibration fails, right? Instead of teaching somebody how to set up targets, we're kind of walking through the diagnostic process, the diagnostic mindset, right? So, just at a high level, Joe, some of the students that I've heard come through those courses are telling us that it's some of the best technical training they've ever taken.
So we focus on how to access and read Ford service information, how to find where the stuff is at, because some of the stuff, it's in the tree there, but you got to kind of like look at different areas and find the stuff because it's not always purely laid out where the stuff is at. And then we get to the service information and we hook up FDRS, the Ford scan tool, to it. And how do we look at that data and interpret that data in there and compare it to what's in the service info to find out what's wrong with that vehicle. But also we can use the collision advantage that we have too. If we know that vehicle's been hit in the left rear, I'm going to start looking at the left rear for some of my issues and see if there's pinched wire harness, something like that, can be part of that issue.
Yeah, for sure. So now let's talk again a little bit about some of the things that we do in our static calibration course. Some of the feedback that I've heard personally from the students coming through there, I think the one that I enjoy the most is the people that come through and say, I had no idea what's required to perform these calibrations and how much work it is. A lot of people think it's just, you go onto that YouTube video and you see, Joe Bob standing on the ladder holding a target and just moving that target around until it'll calibrate. And we've done things, again, in our research where we move a target just, an inch or two. The vehicle, and I say this all the time, these systems are intelligent but trusting because they assume that you've done all the preconditions and set up correctly before you do that calibration. So back to our test, we moved a target a couple inches. This vehicle could still see it, the sensor could still see it, we could calibrate it, and we've got that motorcycle target that when you calibrate it properly, it sees the entire motorcycle behind the car. When you move it a couple inches, now it only sees one of the handlebars on the outside edge. So essentially, they don't see that person in the blind spot anymore.
Yeah, definitely. With that's on the Honda Lane Watch where it shows the camera when you turn the turn signal on. If you're relying purely on that system for your, moving over to the next lane, you don't see that motorcycle, you're going to hit that motorcyclist, and it's going to be a bad time for everybody. I've had some good feedback from the class as well, from some students that went through and sent me some emails later on. They said, "Oh, I just did X and X calibration that I learned from you guys. I'm so glad that I learned it there because it helped me get through this a lot easier and answered my questions that I would have had beforehand. So it's been really great to see the positive feedback we got from this course and that we're on the right path teaching these technicians how to become ADAS technicians and understand the systems and how they work and how to place the targets correctly and how to interpret the OEM service information as well.
Yeah, and we had some conversations at some of our other meetings here as well, talking about just that, right? Because sometimes, I mean, maybe you guys can talk a little bit about how you get through and find this information in the OE procedures, because a lot of times you have to understand how to follow the breadcrumb trail to get all of that information, right?
Yeah, for sure. And every vehicle maker's service information is different. It's not one set format for any of them. So it can be tricky because in one manufacturer they might have it listed in the body section, and then another one you might have to jump around between a couple different sections just to find the information that you're looking for.
Yeah, you're going to be bouncing all over. It could be in body, it could be in electrical, it could be in another section of the service manual, and even then, some of the service information, like you click a link and it's supposed to take you to somewhere else, but it just sits there and doesn't do anything. So you have to know how to find that right spot so you don't start reading the wrong spot. And as technicians, I think we've all gotten to a place so sometimes we get complacent with things and we just like, yeah, I know how to do that. And I just scroll through this and get to my numbers I need. But with ADAS stuff, you can't do that stuff. There's a lot of information in there, especially the notes and warnings in there that help guide you in this calibration process. And if you don't heed those warnings, it's going to cause either the calibration not to go through, or it could calibrate but not be a good calibration, and then that car's back at your shop a couple days later because it came out of calibration, now the light's on.
Right.
And then also, when you're going from vehicle maker to vehicle maker, look at the service information, check the glossary, because a lot of times they'll call different modules or sensors different things, and then you want to make sure that you're finding the right information and making sure you're doing the right calibrations.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to that, vehicle makers a lot of times they'll update their service information, so you always have, even if you've done the calibration before, you did it last week, you need to go back in there and read back through it again because they may have changed it.
Yeah.
And that actually happened to us in our static class where a manufacturer changed some stuff that we had, and we had to go back and change that again because they updated their service information overnight.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning that people that aren't familiar with the iCar RTS Repairability Technical Support website, we do have a section in there that is focused on ADAS, so that someone can go into that system, select the vehicle year, make, and model, and it will actually give you the information that the vehicle could be equipped with. Obviously, we don't have anything that's going to be VIN specific at this point, but it will actually break it down for you and say, here are the systems this vehicle could be equipped with. This is the type of calibrations that could be required and the type of equipment you could need, so that it helps shops understand up front what they're getting into, right? So let's then, let's take another step back, and I've got a little bit different twist I want to talk about here. So if we think about the type of things that repairers need to think about when they're doing these repairs today, and what could potentially be tied to an ADAS calibration, because a lot of times I think people think that if it doesn't damage a sensor, they don't need to worry about it. They don't have to do the calibration, and it's really a whole lot more sensitive than that, right? I mean, if we think about, go back to the days, either one of you guys, any of you, when you first started in this collision repair business, you think there would come a time that you replaced a headlight, and because you replaced that headlight, you need to do an ADAS calibration?
Well, I know Toyota and Lexus, just unplugging it from the vehicle, the front bumper cover, to get access to a headlight, that requires calibration. And if you're not looking at the vehicle service information, you might not know that, and potentially giving the vehicle back to the vehicle owner in an unsafe condition.
Yeah.
And so many times there won't be any kind of malfunction indicator on the dash at all, but the system's not working right.
Right. Yep, we see it all the time, right? So, I mean, if you think about some of the things that you need to think about, I'll give you a story to maybe give you a little bit that'll take you in that direction. Again, we're out on the road and we're going out to see people that are doing these calibrations. And they just wanted to give us an example of a car that they had done some work on, and we were going to go out and do some videos around the ADAS system and just show that things work. This vehicle, it was a Jeep, if I remember right, had come into the facility for hail damage repair. So they RNI'd the front bumper cover just to get it out of the way when they were doing some of the refinish work. Put the bumper cover back on. The car was actually sitting in the done line, ready to go back to the customer when they said, "Here's the keys. Go ahead and use this one to do your demo, your videos." And we get out to start driving this vehicle and realize that the adaptive cruise does not work. You can set the cruise, but it's not slowing down when you're coming up on vehicles in the front. And there we're talking about a system that has a sensor in the front that isn't something that it's going to learn as a dynamic. It actually has like a bubble level thing that you put on the end of it to get it right. And when they were reinstalling or removing that bumper, they had bumped that sensor, and that's all it took. And they had no idea that this system was offline and not working. But it's things like replacing a windshield. Could make a difference. Obviously, you get damage on a quarter panel and you have a blind spot sensor mounted there. You got to be thinking about it, right? I mean, just
There's even some camera systems that are not mounted directly to the windshield. They're a little bit back behind the windshield. And if you read the manufacturer service information, if they get dirty, you can't clean those lenses off. The cameras need to be replaced. If you put any kind of cleaner on there, it's junk by manufacturer specification.
Yeah, I mean, even a fingerprint, there's big warnings and service information about that.
Yeah, and if you're doing a windshield and you pull the camera down and you touch the lens, it's junk. A lot of them say on them, if dropped, scrap. So if you drop that module down, you got to buy a new one.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit now about who in the shop needs to have this knowledge. Who needs to understand ADAS systems? I have my personal opinions on it, but I've been doing a lot of talking here today, so I'm going to stop and let you guys to kind of fill in the blanks here. But who do you think needs to, at a shop level, who needs to understand these systems and the complexities and all those things?
I think everyone needs to, from the non-structural tech, structural tech to refinish tech, because even though they're have a specific role, you have to keep that in the back of your mind, because sometimes when you're pulling a frame rail to straighten up the front end of a vehicle, close enough might not be close enough, because that affects aiming of other sensors might be attached to the front of the vehicle. If it's off a degree or two, like you were saying on that example that they bumped down, and it's going to work, a car length in front of you, but when you're at speed on the highway, 6 car lengths in front of you, it might not even be seeing that car. Refinish tech, like an example with blind spot sensors, so I think everyone needs to be aware of it.
Even to the estimator as well. The estimator needs to know what kind of things are on these vehicles, so when they write up that estimate, they know what has to be done, and so they properly get paid for the work they're doing.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And then depending on how your shop is set up, if you have disassembly techs and reassembly techs, and then you've got everybody in between there, even the disassembly techs and the reassembly techs would have to know. The shop I came from had an in-house mechanic that did all of our mechanical work and alignments. And alignments is something I don't think we touched on yet today, but that's huge. Most of the calibrations that have to be done assume that the alignment is good on the vehicle. But if you have a car that the thrust angle's off, the whole car is skewed, and it's going down the road crooked, when you do the calibration, you're aligning it to the vehicle's body, so it's straight with the body. But if the whole body is skewed, it's shooting over there instead of down the road.
Yep, that was actually going to be one of my next points. But I will also add, by the way, great job. That wasn't rehearsed, but we do need to have, everybody needs to know about it. And I would add that I think even your CSRs need to know about it, because they're going to have that first contact usually with a customer that's been in an accident, they want to bring the car in, and they need to at least understand enough that they can say, hey, your vehicle might be equipped with these systems, and you might need to bring the vehicle in and have it checked out, or at least be able to say, hey, this system may not function properly, so that they're aware, right? So that they're safe while they're driving these vehicles. But your point about the alignment is a big one, because it's not even just something that, in some cases, it's necessary. The vehicle makers, and a lot of these vehicle makers in their repair procedures tell you that the vehicle needs to be aligned properly before performing calibration.
And they're doing alignment. They're also wanting you to measure wheel arch heights, make sure suspension is in the correct height. Even tire pressures, making sure the tire pressures are the same pressure manufacturer specification so that the vehicle's sitting at the correct height. If it's not sitting at the correct height, we can't do the calibration correctly.
Yeah, a lot of them even have specific load requirements. They might have to have a full tank of gas and nothing else in the vehicle at all.
Kind of touching base on what you said about CSRs, working in the facility, you don't have the advantage of knowing what the car was like before the accident. So asking the right questions to make sure that the vehicle owner that's very specific with it can say like, oh, this isn't working, this isn't functioning as is, might also lead to an extra line or something on the estimate to make sure that it's fixed correctly.
All right, well, guys, we're about to run out of time for this session, but anything else you guys would like to share before we sign off? I know we downloaded a lot of information in this session, but ADAS is a really big topic. It feels like people think it's new, but it's really not new, right? It's been around for many years, and I really can't think of a vehicle that's produced today that doesn't have some form of ADAS on there, even if it's just a backup camera.
Well, even then, legislation's coming up that is going to require automatic emergency braking, forward braking, which means that's going to be becoming mandatory down the line here. So cars will be coming with this from the factory, regardless of what model they are or anything like that in the range. So it's very important that we're getting ahead of this stuff and making sure we know how to do these calibrations because it's becoming more and more prevalent in the industry.
Yeah. Yep, I would agree. And then we have all these, this isn't an EV conversation, but we have all these EVs coming into the market. I think the last article I read said something to the effect of 150 vehicles, new models, coming to the market by 2026. And typically, at least so far, most of the EVs that you see are pretty well ADAS equipped.
Yeah, when you think EV nowadays, you think ADAS and EV together. You think self-driving and EVs kind of are lumped together with a lot of people. So you see a lot more of that technology on those EVs than you do on your ICE vehicles.
Yeah, for sure. I think, to close it out, I would just say that I think that collision repair shop owners and technicians need to really start paying attention to this and getting themselves trained on it and understand it. We all know that the collision repair market, the shops operate on a pretty thin margin, and this is going to become a bigger and bigger piece of the repair process that it'll be harder and harder to give away to a sublet vendor. You'll need to keep this kind of stuff in-house if you can. Obviously, you need to make sure you have the right conditions and training and equipment and all those things to do it, but ADAS is only going to continue to grow. It's not going away.
In addition to that, the time that it takes to have a mobile person come out or find someone to calibrate your calibrations, it takes some extra time in the shop. So having them in-house, it just speeds the whole process along, gets the customer back their vehicle quicker, and make sure that you know exactly what's going on with that vehicle. You're not relying on some third-party person to tell you, yeah, it's okay. How do I verify that? How do I know for sure it's okay?
Right. Well, all right. Well, guys, thanks for joining me up here today. I appreciate it. And everybody enjoy SEMA.